He thought he had everything: power, wealth, the world at his feet, until one cold evening, a poor little girl tugged at his sleeve. Around her fragile neck hung a necklace he had lost decades ago, the last memory of the woman he once loved. In that moment, his heart froze. Who was this child? And how could she hold the key to his buried past? This is not just a story, it's a piece of someone's hidden pain, quietly waiting to be heard. In today's story, we dive into a moment that can change everything, in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Canada, the US, Norway? Let us know in the comments, because stories may begin anywhere, but they connect us all. Stay with us until the very end, because sometimes, what breaks your heart can also heal it. And if you believe stories can change lives, hit subscribe. Join our journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. The city was alive with the hum of ambition. Glass towers stretched into the clouds, symbols of power and wealth. Among them stood the empire of Alexander Graves, a man known to the world as a ruthless billionaire who had built his fortune from nothing but relentless determination. To strangers, he was an untouchable figure, draped in luxury and authority. Yet, beneath the armor of his success, Alexander carried a wound that time had failed to heal. Years ago, he had lost more than just a priceless object. He had lost a piece of his soul. A necklace, delicate, silver, adorned with a sapphire pendant, had been the last gift his late wife gave him before tragedy struck. It vanished mysteriously the night of her death. He had searched endlessly, offering millions for its return, but the necklace never resurfaced. For Alexander, that necklace was not simply jewelry, it was memory. It was love. It was the heartbeat of a life stolen from him. And so his heart hardened, his laughter died, and his empire grew on the foundation of his loneliness. But fate has a way of circling back, weaving lives together in ways one can never predict. One rainy evening, in the narrow alleyways of the city, his chauffeur-driven car slowed to a stop at a red light. As Alexander stared absently out of the tinted glass, his gaze fell upon a figure he could not ignore. A frail little girl, shivering in the rain, clutching a paper bag as though it contained her whole world. Her clothes were worn, her face pale, but it wasn't her suffering that froze Alexander's breath. Around her small neck, glimmering faintly beneath the street lamp, was his wife's necklace. The one he had buried in memory. The one he thought he would never see again. And in that instant, Alexander Graves' world shifted forever. The rain came down in heavy sheets, painting the streets in a blur of silver and gray. Alexander's car idled quietly at the intersection, its engine humming softly. Inside, the billionaire leaned against the leather seat, scrolling absently through numbers on his tablet, the lifeblood of his empire flowing in green and red graphs. But for the first time in years, numbers failed to hold him. His eyes locked on the child outside. She couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. Her small shoes were soaked, her hair plastered against her forehead. She stood barefoot now, one shoe dangling from her hand, the other lost somewhere in the flooding street. Yet, despite her frailty, her chin was lifted, stubborn against the storm. Then Alexander saw it, the necklace. It wasn't a cheap imitation. He would know that pendant anywhere the way the sapphire caught the faintest trace of light, the scratches along the chain from years of wear, the slight bend in the clasp that only he and his wife had noticed. His heart pounded. Memories clawed their way up. His wife's slaughter, the way she had fastened it around his neck once, whispering that it would keep him strong. That very night she had left the house and never returned, lost in a car accident that shattered his world. The necklace disappeared with her. Yet here it was, on this child. Stop the car? Alexander's voice cut through the silence, startling his driver. Sir, I said stop the car. The tires hissed against the wet pavement as the vehicle pulled over. Alexander's chest felt tight, every muscle alive with a storm he hadn't felt in years. He had faced ruthless competitors, billion-dollar deals, and scandals that could ruin nations, but nothing terrified him like the sight of that necklace. He stepped out into the rain without an umbrella, his tailored suit quickly soaking through. The girl noticed him, her eyes widening in fear. She turned to run, clutching the paper bag to her chest. Wait, Alexander called out, his voice harsher than he intended. But the girl only ran faster, and then, her foot slipped on the slick pavement. She fell hard, the paper bag spilling open to reveal scraps of bread and bruised apples. Alexander's breath caught as she scrambled to her knees, her little fingers grasping desperately for her food, ignoring the pain in her scraped palms. The necklace swung wildly around her neck, glimmering defiantly in the rain. He took a single step toward her, when suddenly, a man's shadow appeared from the far corner of the alley, calling out her name. The girl froze. Her wide eyes darted between Alexander and the approaching figure, and just like that, she bolted into the darkness. Alexander stood rooted in the rain, his breath ragged, his heart hammering in ways he hadn't felt in decades. The street was empty now, except for the scattered bread rolling into the gutter, and the faint echo of the little girl's footsteps fading into the night. He wanted to chase her, to demand answers, to seize the necklace and prove to himself that it wasn't a cruel trick of the light. But something in her frightened eyes held him back. He had seen desperation before, the kind that drove people to cling to scraps, but this was different. This was fear born of a life too fragile to trust anyone, especially a man like him. His driver rushed to his side with an umbrella, but Alexander waved him away. He crouched down instead, picking up one of the bruised apples. Its skin was mottled, its flesh soft to the touch. He turned it over in his palm, feeling the weight of it. To him, it was nothing, a fruit he would never eat, a thing discarded in seconds. But to her, it was survival, and she had guarded it with a fierceness that startled him. He straightened, scanning the darkened alley where she had disappeared. The shadow of the man who had called her name still haunted his mind. Was he her father, a guardian, or someone darker? Someone she feared as much as she feared him. He didn't know, but the way she had fled made it clear. Her life was a secret she wasn't ready to share. Back inside the car, Alexander sank into the leather seat, his wet clothes clinging uncomfortably. His driver hesitated, unsure if they should leave. "Home, sir?" he asked carefully. Alexander didn't answer right away. His gaze was still fixed on the rain-smeared glass, watching the place where she had stood. Finally, he whispered, "Find her." The driver glanced at him in the mirror. "Sir, I don't care how long it takes. I want every street, every alley, every shelter checked. The girl with the necklace. Bring her to me." His voice was quiet but carried the weight of command, the same tone that had built empires and crushed rivals. Yet tonight, it trembled ever so slightly, betraying an ache buried too deep. The city moved on around them. Neon lights blinking, horns blaring, lives intersecting like tangled threads. But Alexander's thoughts were miles away, caught between past and present. He remembered the night his wife had clasped that necklace around her own throat, smiling at him with a love so fierce it had burned away his every fear. She had kissed him, told him she would be back soon, and then the phone call. The wreck, the silence, and the necklace gone forever. Until tonight. He leaned his head back, closing his eyes, but instead of darkness he saw her, the little girl shivering, clutching her paper bag like it held her very soul. He saw the sapphire glimmer against her skin, mocking him with its impossible presence. Somewhere in this sprawling, unforgiving city, a child carried the key to his deepest sorrow. And Alexander Graves knew with a certainty that chilled him, that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. But as his car rolled away deep in the shadows of the alley, a figure lingered where the girl had vanished. Watching, waiting, protecting her. Or perhaps guarding a secret that Alexander was never meant to uncover. The night felt endless, but dawn eventually crept across the city, turning the rain-soaked streets into mirrors of pale gold. Alexander had not slept. He sat in his study, surrounded by towering shelves of books and the quiet hum of the fire. But even in the warmth of his home, he felt cold, as though the rain from last night still clung to his bones. On the desk before him lay the bruised apple he had retrieved, resting awkwardly on crystal glass. It looked out a place in the world he had built. A world where everything was polished, perfect, and expensive. That apple, half rotted and battered, had no business being there. And yet, Alexander couldn't take his eyes off it. It was a reminder that somewhere outside his mansion's walls, a child was fighting for scraps of survival while wearing the one object that tied him to a past he could not let go. He had spent the entire night making calls. Discreet inquiries to shelters, orphanages, hospitals. He hired investigators, men who owed him favors, and told them to scour the city for a girl, 7, maybe 8 years old, thin, dark-haired, wearing a sapphire necklace. Every word felt like it might break in his throat. When one of his men had asked why the search mattered, Alexander had hung up the phone without an answer. How could he explain what even he could not fully understand? As the morning grew brighter, the world outside his estate began its usual rhythm. Cars flooding into the city, newspapers reporting profits and scandals, traders shouting as markets opened. Normally, Alexander would have been at the heart of it all. Today, he couldn't care less. He was haunted by the image of the girl slipping on wet pavement, scrambling desperately for scraps of bread as though the world would take even that from her. He thought of his wife again. The night she had fastened the necklace around her neck before leaving. He had watched her from the doorway, her silhouette glowing under the soft lamplight. She had laughed when she caught him staring, teasing him that he'd fall in love with her all over again if she kept wearing it. And he always had. That memory, once a comfort, now burned. A knock came at the door, breaking his thoughts. His butler entered quietly, holding a tablet. "Sir, you should see this." Alexander snatched it from his hands, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the screen. A grainy photograph appeared, taken by one of his men. The little girl was there, standing near a soup kitchen, clutching her paper bag once more, the sapphire pendant glinting faintly under the harsh morning light. His heart lurched. She was real. She was no illusion. But then he noticed something else in the frame, something that made his chest tighten. Just behind her, Half hidden in the crowd, stood the same man from the alley, the shadow who had called her name. His face was clearer now, hardened, watchful, and his hand rested firmly on the girl's shoulder, as though she belonged to him. Alexander's grip on the tablet trembled. Who was this man? A protector, a captor, or something far worse? One thing was certain: the necklace was no accident. And if that man knew its value, not in money but in memory, then Alexander Graves was no longer the only one chasing ghosts. The image on the screen would not leave him. The girl, so small, fragile, her eyes darting with a wariness no child should ever know. And the man, the stranger who stood behind her with a possessive grip, as if anchoring her to a world she could not escape. Alexander zoomed in on the photograph until the pixels blurred, but no matter how distorted the image became, the necklace still burned against her chest, undeniable. His wife's necklace. Sleep had abandoned him completely. Instead, he found himself pacing the length of his study like a man imprisoned. Every corner of the room seemed to whisper her name, every shadow tugged at the emptiness in his chest. He had lived years in solitude, burying grief beneath layers of wealth and power, but now all of it was unraveling because of a child he had never met. By noon, the investigators returned with fragments of information. They told him the girl was often seen near the soup kitchen in the East District, sometimes begging outside bakeries, sometimes vanishing for days at a time. Nobody knew where she came from or who her parents were. Some said she lived in the derelict factory buildings nearby, others claimed she had no home at all. And always there was the man, a shadow on the periphery, never far from her, never letting her stray too long. Alexander listened in silence, though inside he was raging. His mind spiraled with questions. How had she come to wear the necklace? Had it been stolen and sold, passed down until it landed in her hands? Or had that man taken it from somewhere, perhaps even from her? His heart twisted at the thought. What if she had no choice but to wear it, a prisoner to someone else's cruelty? As the afternoon light slanted across the marble floors of his mansion, Alexander made a decision. He would see her again with his own eyes. No photographs, no reports. He needed to feel the truth for himself, to stand before her and ask the questions that consumed him. That evening, his car slipped through the East District, far from the glass towers and wide avenues of his empire. The streets here were narrow and cracked, buildings leaning with age, windows patched with cardboard and tape. Children darted between puddles, their laughter too thin, too brittle for their years. The air smelled of dampness and smoke, of lives forgotten by those in power. When his driver pulled up near the soup kitchen, Alexander spotted her instantly. She was smaller than he remembered, her frame almost swallowed by an oversized coat. She clutched the paper bag again, holding it like a treasure chest. Around her neck, the sapphire glinted with cruel beauty. For a moment, his breath caught. He wanted to step out, to walk toward her, to kneel and ask her name. But then he saw him, the man, emerging from the shadows once more. He placed his hand on the girl's shoulder, guiding her firmly away from the crowd. The girl glanced back just for an instant. Her eyes met Alexander's through the tinted glass of the car. Wide frightened, almost pleading. And then she was gone again, swallowed by the maze of alleys. Alexander slammed his fist against the seat. That look, he could not mistake it. It was the same look his wife had given him on the night she left, as if she carried a secret she couldn't speak. The necklace had found its way back into his life, but so had a mystery that was growing darker by the hour. And deep inside, Alexander knew. Whatever tied that child to him was not chance. It was fate clawing its way back. The drive back to his mansion felt like moving through fog. Alexander's world had been built on clarity, numbers, contracts, decisions made with precision. But now everything inside him was tangled, messy, and uncertain. He could not stop replaying that moment when the girl's eyes met his. It had been fleeting, a mere heartbeat in the noise of the street, but in that single glance he saw something that unmoored him completely. Fear, yes, but also a silent call, as though she wanted to speak, to reach out, but could not. That night, he could not bring himself to sit at the long dining table, laid out by servants who pretended not to notice his silence. The roasted lamb, the fine wine, none of it mattered. Instead, he wandered into the room he rarely entered anymore. His late wife's room. It had been untouched for years, preserved like a museum of her existence. The faint scent of her perfume still clung to the fabrics, though it was softer now, faded with time. On her vanity lay the small jewelry box where she once kept her treasures. He opened it slowly, reverently, though he knew what he would find: emptiness where the sapphire necklace should have been. He sat down heavily, his hands pressed to his face. The girl's tiny frame haunted him, and behind her, the looming figure of the man. Who was he? And why did his presence tighten Alexander's chest with unease? He tried to convince himself that perhaps the man was simply a guardian, a relative, someone who had stumbled into hard times. But the way his grip had tightened on the girl's shoulder, it did not speak of love. It spoke of possession. By midnight, Alexander had summoned his head investigator. "I want everything," he demanded. His voice was sharper now, tinged with desperation. Where she is, where she lives, who that man is. I don't care how deep you have to dig. No more fragments. I want the truth. The investigator nodded, but Alexander could see the hesitation in his eyes. Sir, if I may, sometimes truths are not what we expect them to be. Alexander's jaw tightened. I don't care. Find her. When he was left alone again, he poured himself a glass of scotch, but it tasted like ashes on his tongue. He set it down untouched. His reflection in the window looked back at him, wary and older than he remembered. For years, he had been untouchable, sealed off from the world by money, status, and walls higher than any fortress. But that fragile child had cracked through all of it in a single glance, and beneath the unease grew something else, a seed of suspicion, gnawing at the edge of his mind. What if the necklace had not simply resurfaced? What if its return was deliberate, a message, a reminder, or worse, a trap? For the first time in his life, Alexander Graves wasn't sure if he was the one hunting the truth, or if the truth was hunting him. The following days felt heavier than any Alexander had endured before. Meetings blurred together, contracts slid across polished tables, but his mind was never present. His empire ran itself, his executives knew the motions, yet his heart was fixed on the image of a little girl in a ragged coat, sapphire glinting against her fragile chest. Every night he returned to the same room, his wife's room, as if the lingering traces of her might whisper answers he could not find. But the silence only deepened, pressing against his ribs like a weight he could not carry. On the third day, his investigator returned with a file, thick with photographs and notes. Alexander opened it with trembling hands. The girl's name, or at least what she was called on the streets, was Lily. No record of a birth certificate, no school, no family tied to her by law. She existed only in the whispers of those who had seen her begging for food or slipping into shelters for warmth. And always, there was the man. His name was written in bold at the top of the report, Marcus Hale. The name tugged at something deep in Alexander's memory. A figure from the past, long buried beneath deals and decades. Hale had once been on the periphery of Alexander's world, a man who trafficked not in wealth but in shadows, illegal trades, debts, the kind of dealings Alexander had turned his back on when he clawed his way into legitimate fortune. They had crossed paths once, long ago, and even then Hale's presence had left him uneasy. Ruthless, cold, a man who saw children not as souls, but as currency. The thought of Lily under that man's control made Alexander's stomach twist violently. He read on, each word striking like a hammer. Lily had been seen carrying scraps from dumpsters. Hale was rumored to collect what she found, sometimes selling what she scavenged, sometimes pawning off trinkets. That necklace, Alexander's wife's necklace, could it have been just another object Hale had used her to peddle? And if so, why had he let her keep it? Unless it was never Hale's to sell. Unless it meant something more. Alexander slammed the file shut, his breath sharp. His chest ached with a mixture of rage and dread. The photograph of Lily, paper, clipped to the first page, slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. He bent down to retrieve it and froze. Her eyes stared back at him from the glossy paper, so wide, so hauntingly familiar. For a moment, he could not breathe. They were his wife's eyes. The same shape, the same light. A resemblance that gnawed at his reason. He dropped the photo onto the desk, his hands trembling. His mind screamed against the possibility, the madness of it. Yet his heart whispered it relentlessly. What if this was not coincidence? What if the necklace had found its way to Lily, because she was not just a child lost in the city, but something far more entwined with him? And what if Marcus Hale knew the truth all along? Alexander could not tear his eyes away from the photograph. He traced the outlines of Lily's face with his gaze, every line pulling him deeper into a storm of questions. Those eyes, his wife's eyes, burned in his memory. It was impossible. She had died years ago. He had stood beside her casket, buried her with his own hands. He had grieved until grief hollowed him into stone. And yet the girl existed. Flesh and blood, breathing the same air, carrying the same sapphire his wife once cherished. He pressed his fists into the desk, knuckles whitening. His mind fought to resist the thought, but his heart refused to let go. Could Lily somehow be connected to her? A daughter? No, the timing didn't fit. A niece, a child his wife had secretly cared for perhaps. Or, his throat tightened, a child his wife had never told him about. The possibilities clawed at him, each one more unbearable than the last. If there was truth in that resemblance, then Marcus Hale's presence grew all the more sinister. Hale was not a man who kept things by accident. If Lily was special, if she was blood, then Hale's grip on her meant danger deeper than Alexander could stomach. Restless, he rose from his desk and moved to the window. The city glowed beneath him, thousands of lights flickering like stars fallen from the heavens. To most it was beauty. To him it was a cage, each street holding secrets he was desperate to uncover. Somewhere down there, Lily slept, or perhaps trembled awake, while Hale stood over her, shadowed and silent. By morning, Alexander made his decision. He would go to her, not as a billionaire hidden behind tinted glass, but as a man stripped of his armor. He ordered the car but told his driver to wait blocks away when they reached the East District. He walked the final distance himself, the first time in years his shoes had touched the cracked sidewalks of the city's forgotten corners. The soup kitchen loomed at the end of the street, its door spilling warm light and the smell of broth into the cold air. Alexander watched from the shadows. Children shuffled in with mothers or brothers with no one at all, and then he saw her. Lily. She clutched her paper bag again, though this time it was full, bread peeking through the torn top. She smiled faintly at the volunteer who had handed it to her. A small smile, wary, but genuine. It pierced Alexander deeper than any boardroom battle ever had. Then Hale appeared. He stepped from the darkness like a phantom, his hand closing on Lily's shoulder once more. Alexander's muscles tensed, every instinct screaming to rush forward. But he forced himself to hold back to watch. Hale bent low, whispering something into the girl's ear. Whatever he said made her flinch, her little hands gripping the bag tighter. Alexander clenched his jaw. This was no guardian. This was control. As Lily and Hale disappeared into the maze of alleys, Alexander followed quietly, his breath shallow. And in that moment, he realized something terrifying. He was no longer chasing the necklace. He was chasing a truth that could shatter everything he believed about his past and himself. The alleys twisted like a labyrinth, narrow and damp, the walls stained with the wear of forgotten years. Alexander kept his distance, his polished shoes splashing in shallow puddles as he trailed Marcus Hale and the child. Lily's small frame was nearly swallowed by the bulk of Hale's coat as he guided her deeper into the district, his hand never leaving her shoulder. Each step Alexander took felt heavier, not because of the rain or the weight of his coat, but because of the battle raging within him. He had faced ruthless men before, men who thrived in shadows and bartered with human misery. But this was different. This was personal. They stopped at a crumbling warehouse, its windows shattered and doors rusted. Hale shoved them open with ease and led Lily inside. Alexander pressed himself against the wall, peering through the gap. The interior was dim, lit by a single swinging bulb that cast more shadows than light. Old crates and broken machinery cluttered the space. It smelled of mold and rust, a place long abandoned by commerce but not by desperation. Lily set her paper bag down carefully on a crate, guarding it with both hands. Hale towered over her, his voice low but sharp, echoing off the concrete walls. Alexander could not hear the words, but he could see the girl's reaction. Her shoulders hunched, her face lowered, her small body trembling under the weight of his presence. Yet when Hale reached toward her necklace, Lily's hands flew to her chest, clutching the pendant with defiance far beyond her years. Something inside Alexander snapped. That necklace had once been a symbol of love, of promise. To see a child forced to guard it like a shield against cruelty tore at his soul. For the first time in years, he felt something stronger than grief-fury. He moved without thinking, pushing the door open just enough to slip inside. The sound caught Hale's attention. The man turned, his face falling into shadow, but the recognition in his eyes was instant. Graves, he spat, his tone half a sneer, half surprise. Alexander stood tall, his soaked coat clinging to him, his voice cold as ice. Step away from her. Hale laughed, the sound low and cruel. I wondered how long it would take you. The city whispers loud when a man like you starts sniffing around places he doesn't belong. He tightened his grip on Lily's shoulder, making her wince. This girl isn't yours, Graves. Walk away. But Alexander didn't move. His eyes locked on Lily's, and in that fragile face he saw not only his wife's reflection but something else. Trust. Even through her fear, she was watching him, clinging silently to the hope that he might save her. I'm not leaving without her, Alexander said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of a man who had lost everything once and would not lose again. For a moment silence hung between them, broken only by the creak of the swinging bulb. Then Hale's lips curled into a smile, thin and venomous. You think you know what she is, he said softly. But you don't, and when you find out, Graves, it'll destroy you. The words slid through the air like poison, settling deep into Alexander's chest. You think you know what she is, but you don't. He stood frozen, his breath caught, the sound of his own heartbeat thundering louder than the dripping water in the warehouse. Hale's grip on Lily's shoulder tightened, his thumb pressing cruelly against her collarbone, yet the girl's small fingers clung fiercely to the necklace, as though it were her last defense against the world. Alexander's voice, when it came, was low and sharp. What are you talking about? When Hale smirked, his teeth flashing under the swinging light. You think she's just some street rat wearing a trinket that belongs to you. But this necklace isn't hers by accident. Nothing about her is by accident. His gaze darkened, and there was something almost triumphant in his tone. She's tied to your past in ways you can't begin to imagine. Alexander took a step forward, fists trembling at his sides. He had built empires by controlling every variable, by never allowing uncertainty to dictate his life. But here, in this decaying warehouse, Every certainty he had ever clung to seemed to fracture. If you hurt her, hurt her. Hale barked a laugh, cruel and hollow. I've kept her alive. Fed her when no one else cared. You sit up in your glass tower while children rot in the streets' graves. Don't pretend to be her savior. Lily's wide eyes flicked from Hale to Alexander, pleading silently. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak but didn't dare. The sight tore Alexander apart. He wanted to scoop her into his arms, to shield her from the shadows pressing in, but Hale's presence loomed between them like a wall of iron. Why does she have the necklace? Alexander demanded, his voice breaking with a rare crack of desperation. Hale's smirk deepened. Ask yourself that. Ask yourself what your precious wife didn't tell you before she died. Because this girl, she's more of your world than you'll ever be ready to admit. He leaned close to Lily then, his whisper curling against her ear, making her flinch. Tell him, little bird. Tell him who you are. But Lily shook her head violently, clutching the pendant tighter, her eyes filling with tears. Alexander's chest heaved, fury and fear warring inside him. Hale's words twisted like barbed wire around his heart, each implication more unbearable than the last. Could it be true? Could his wife, the woman he had loved beyond reason, have hidden something so monumental from him? A secret child, a fragment of her life he was never allowed to know. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of Lily's soft sobs. Alexander stepped closer, his voice rough but gentle now, directed at the trembling child. Lily, if you know something you can tell me. You're safe with me. But before she could answer, Hale yanked her behind him, his voice sharp as a blade. Nuff. The single word echoed through the cavernous room, and in its wake Alexander realized with chilling clarity, whatever truth Hale guarded was not just about the necklace. It was about blood. And if Alexander pushed any further tonight, that truth might shatter his entire world. Under the pale morning light, Edward sat silently at the end of the long wooden table in his library, the very room that had once felt like a mausoleum of memories. Now across from him, Anna sat curled in a velvet chair, her small fingers still clutching the necklace, as if it were the last thread connecting her to a world she barely understood. Her eyes, wide and searching, rested on him with a fragile trust that both warmed and broke his heart. Edward could barely bring himself to speak, afraid that any word might shatter this delicate moment. Yet silence was not enough anymore. I knew this necklace once, he finally whispered, his voice low and unsteady. It belonged to someone very dear to me, someone I lost a long time ago. His hands trembled as he spoke, the image of Catherine flickering in his mind. Her laughter, her touch, her eyes so much like Anna's. He swallowed hard, forcing the words past the tightness in his chest. Tell me, Anna, how did it come to you? Anna lowered her gaze, her lashes trembling as though she carried a secret too heavy for her small frame. Mama gave it to me, she murmured, her voice fragile. She said it was from someone who loved me before I was even born. She told me never to lose it, because one day it would lead me to the truth. The Edward's breath caught. The air around him thickened, pressing against his chest until he thought his heart might give out. Catherine, her promise, her words. She had kept it alive through this child, his child. The question hung like a thundercloud in his mind. He studied Anna's face, the curve of her chin, the stubborn lift of her brow when she tried to be strong. Every feature seemed to whisper Catherine's name. Your mother? Edward asked carefully, his voice cracking. What was her name? Anna's lips parted, but before she could answer, the heavy doors of the library creaked open. Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper, stepped in with hesitation etched into every line of her face. She looked between Edward and Anna, her eyes filling with something that seemed dangerously close to knowledge. Sir, she said softly, perhaps it is time you know everything. Edward turned sharply, his nerves fraying. What do you mean? Mrs. Whitmore wrung her hands, her gaze dropping. Catherine came to me years ago. She asked me to deliver a message to you, but I was a coward. I thought I was protecting her, protecting you. I never knew the child would find her way back here. Anna's small hand reached across the table, placing itself over Edward's. The touch was so light, yet it sent a shock through him, breaking the dam he had built for decades. Tears he had buried poured freely now, blurring the edges of everything he saw. Anna, he whispered, clutching her hand tightly. You are not just a child who carries Catherine's necklace. You are the piece of her I thought I had lost forever. And if you'll let me, I will never let you suffer another day of hunger or loneliness again. Anna's eyes filled with tears, but a smile trembled at the corners of her lips, a fragile light in the dim room. For the first time in years, Edward felt something he thought had been buried with Catherine. Hope. And yet, as the fire crackled and the truth hung heavy in the air, Edward could not shake the lingering thought that this was only the beginning. The necklace had returned. Catherine's child was before him. But somewhere, hidden beneath the ashes of the past, more secrets waited, secrets that could either bind them together forever or tear them apart once again. The house seemed to hold its breath. The clock ticked louder, and Edward knew that destiny had only just begun to speak.
A cold-hearted millionaire drowning in wealth, but starved of love, meets a poor little girl on a snowy night. When she shows him a necklace, his world shatters, because it belonged to the woman he lost and the daughter he never knew. In one breathtaking moment, secrets of the past collide with the innocence of a child, forcing him to face the truth he ran from all his life. This isn't just a story of money, it's a story of blood, love, and redemption.